right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I love that I get to do this at the Cube. I think this is so cool. I was revealing to Kelly and one other person earlier that this isn't my first performance at the Cube. But my first performance at the Cube was after a number of drinks at the Peasant Cookery patio over there. It was at like 2 a.m. And I was like, I'm gonna sing some Rent. The stage is open. I'm sure there's a video of 3 of us floating around somewhere having a great time on this stage late at night. That was a long time ago, but it's nice to be back. So we're talking about creating rituals that go along with our big work energy. And big work energy is something I talk a lot about in the work that I do. So I spend a lot of time with leaders, coaching, training leaders, but I'm also really passionate about people sort of finding their best at work. I'm also really passionate about making work a better place to be. I hope that all of you work places that are really like empowering and fulfilling, but not everybody does. And so I like to have a lot of conversations with organizations about the way that people work and the way that people can find their big work energy at work. So to start, what is big work energy? Well, big work energy is sort of that unique energy that somebody brings to their work, that somebody brings to their colleagues, brings to their team, maybe brings to the people that they lead. It's really specific and authentic to each individual, looks really different from person to person. And ultimately, it's that energy that you bring that allows you to build relationships in your own way, get things done in your own way at work, influence others in what you do. And so in sort of chatting with Kelly about this morning's theme, we decided to blend these two. What are the rituals that can help us really find our big work energy when we really need it? And when I think about big work energy, I knew that was going to happen. Excuse me one second. When we think about big work energy, I think about 3 things. So I think what makes up our big work energy is 1, knowing our strengths. So what are we really good at? What comes to us naturally? What do we get complimented on? Maybe that, people constantly say like, oh, you're really good at this thing, or I see this thing in what you do, right? What are those strengths, those things that you do really well? Our presence, sort of how we show up, how we present to the world, how we bring that authentic presentation of who we are, which is really different from person to person. I think sometimes when we think about presence, we think it has to be like big personality, loud, really out there in terms of, leadership presence or your presence at work. But I know a lot of people that have a really quiet, calm, lovely presence that's really grounding and just as special as the big charismatic presence that somebody else might have. And then confidence. So when I think about big work energy, it's your strengths, it's finding your presence, how you want to show up, and sort of being in a place of confidence, right? Being in a place that you can trust and rely on yourself, right? You're confident that, hey, if something happens, you're going to figure it out. You can trust yourself to figure it out and move forward. And I think that rituals can be really helpful in getting us back into a place of knowing our strengths, finding our presence, and finding our confidence. Now, I'll admit, when I started thinking about this presentation, I struggled a little bit with the ritual piece of it because I kept getting stuck with routines. And a couple other people have mentioned that this morning. I kept thinking about things and I'd be like, nah, that's a routine, that's not a ritual, right? And so really was thinking about what is the difference between a routine and a ritual. And often when I think about rituals, I think about things that are, traditional, maybe have to do with our family, with our culture, with our beliefs, right? We think about these rituals we go through when we're celebrating something, when there's a wedding, rituals we go through when we're mourning something. Often these are things that, we're doing with groups of other people and sort of give us guidelines on how to behave, how to work through something, how to feel what we need to feel. And this is a little bit different. We're thinking about rituals that might be group rituals. I know it was mentioned team rituals, right? How we celebrate things when something goes well with our team, maybe how we deal with something when it doesn't go our way as a team. So it can be in groups. We're also thinking a lot about what are those individual rituals that we can put in place that we know ground us, that we know help us be at our best at work or in life. And the real difference, as was sort of mentioned this morning, is this idea of connecting to intention, right? That routines are things that we sort of check a box on. And rituals are things that have an energy behind them, they have an intention behind them, they mean something to us, and there's a purpose behind them. So, for instance, I eat usually most mornings, not this morning because I was speaking so early and I can't eat right before I get on stage and speak. But normally, I eat yogurt and granola every morning for breakfast. That's a routine, right? What makes it a ritual for me is usually when I'm doing that, I really try hard to do this. I do no screens. So I'm not in front of my computer. I don't have my phone with me. I usually have a notebook and I am writing a few things that have to do with the day. So maybe there's an intention for the day. Maybe there's a couple things that I'm just thinking, okay, if I only get 3 things done today, what are the 3 things I'm gonna get done, right? It takes some time to sort of think about my day. I also have a friend that gave me a deck of affirmation cards recently, and so I've added that into the ritual of pulling a card every morning and sort of thinking about that card. What does that mean for me? So that's, transitioning something that might start as a routine, breakfast, into a bit of a ritual. I also, every January, I'm sure there's got to be a few other people in this group that have done this. Anybody familiar with Yoga by Adriene? I knew there would be so many hands, yeah. Okay, so she does her January 30-day yoga thing, right? Every January, and I try and do that. Sometimes I'm successful all 30 days, sometimes I'm not. And again, that can be something that you could build a bit of a ritual around, and something that I started to do, because I'm best at doing that first thing in the morning. The longer I go in a day without working out or moving, the less likely I am to do it. And I find it hard to get up in the middle of winter, it's dark, and do yoga in the morning. Fun tip, and maybe transitioning it to a ritual, take your Christmas lights off your Christmas tree if you have one, put them around your yoga mat, and then when you get up and you do your yoga, it's like kind of magical, right? And it makes you feel like, oh, I'm not rushing through this to check a box. I'm intentional, I'm taking my time with this. At the end when she says, take a few more minutes to breathe, if you don't have to get right into your day, take some time. Well, if I've got magical Christmas lights around my mat, I'm probably gonna take a few more minutes, right? So these are some of the things that might shift us from routine to ritual, right? What's the intention? What are you trying to get out of it? What's the energy that you want to have behind that activity? We might also think a little bit about what our own big work energy is and how we describe it. Because then I think we have a better shot at figuring out which rituals help us get there. So if I were to describe my big work energy, I would say generally, I think it's pretty positive, forward moving. It's uplifting, hopefully. That's why I named my company Uplift Engagement. It's fun. It's a little bit disruptive. I like to challenge leaders in workplaces to think about work differently, do things a little bit differently. I'll also admit that when you think about your big work energy, that's my big work energy at its best. My big work energy at its worst, it's a little prickly. I have some very good friends in the audience. I'm like, have you seen a prickly Jane? Sure have. It's not as forward moving, right? So what are the things I can do to shift from being in that space to being in the more positive space? And understanding what are those words that you're aiming for? What are those words that ground you, that bring you back to sort of being your best, whether it's at work or in life? What I loved about what Christine shared when saying thank you to Kelly is I feel like you described Kelly's big work energy. Right? You're like, she's thoughtful, she's vibrant, she's fun, she's a beautiful creative soul. That is clearly Kelly's big work energy has shone through, and that's become obvious to the people around her. And that is so powerful, so special. I'm sure it means a lot when somebody sees you that way and you're like, oh yeah, that is how I feel about myself. And other people see that in me too, right? And again, it's something that on a bad day, not so great day, something hasn't gone your way. It's how can I get back to that sort of feeling that I know I can be in when I'm at my best. So, rituals that help find big work energy. I'm gonna share one story, then I'm gonna share a few ideas that you can take away with you here today. So I was trying to think about how do I, get myself in my big work energy. And I thought about the Tedex presentation, because often when I think about when you really need to draw on your big work energy, it's like a big day, right? You're like, I have a big meeting, a big presentation, I have a job interview, something that matters, right? And I will admit this TEDx, it mattered to me. And it felt like the stakes were a little bit higher than some of the other presenting that I do. I talk in front of groups a lot. I do a lot of training, a lot of speaking, but the TEDx was, in front of a few hundred people on a stage with lights, and it was filmed. And that video was gonna last forever and be uploaded to YouTube at some point. The stakes felt kind of high. It was also scripted. And I don't generally do a lot of scripted stuff. I have notes here today to keep me on track, but I'm just like, it's coming out the way it's coming out, right? The TEDx, I specifically wanted to say things in a certain way, so the stakes felt high. And so I'm thinking, okay, what are some of the rituals that I leveraged to help me that day, that week? And I needed some help that week because the event was on a Thursday. On the Saturday before, we had our last group rehearsal. I'm looking at Margot because Margot was a fellow speaker with me. On the Saturday before, we had our sort of last group rehearsal, last big rehearsal. And I was pretty well prepared. I had been off script for a couple of days. I had the odd time where I'm like, oh, what's the next line? But man, I got up for that dress rehearsal that day and I lost the plot. I just could not find it. First, couple minutes, Margot had my speech and I'm like, line, right? And it was stressful. It felt like, oh my gosh, maybe I don't actually know this thing. We're 4 days out. How could this be happening? And when you think about rituals, you sometimes think a little bit about traditions too. And I got home and I was stressed that afternoon, which was good because it made me practice even more and get even more prepared, which was fine. But I spoke to my cousin Kate, who works in theater and has a background in theater, has been involved in theater for a long time. And I was like, oh, Kate, I just had the worst dress rehearsal ever. And she looked at me and went, oh my God, congratulations. She's like, a horrible dress rehearsal means an amazing opening night. That's the tradition of theater. She's like, you're gonna ace it, it's fine. I was like, oh my God, total mindset shift, right? But these rituals and traditions that exist, in theater, okay, that's helpful to sort of reframe. And on the day of, I thought a lot about what I needed to do to be at my best. I was just after lunch, so I had to, there were 6 or 8 people and lunch before I went. You're getting nervous all morning. And, when I think about those rituals that help me be at my best, one big one is before I speak, I have to stand. So, even this morning, I'm sort of standing off to the side, I want to feel my feet on the ground. And I really think about that a lot. I think about standing, I'm connecting to the ground, my posture. Maybe it's even a little bit of subtle power posing that's happening, but that's a ritual for me. I need to feel that connection. I need to feel my feet on the ground. I was worried about blanking out on stage, so I'd say I had a little mantra, which was really just the first line of my TED Talk. I'm like, if I can get out and say the first line, the rest of it will just happen, right? And the first line was something like, I don't know if you've heard, but apparently nobody wants to work anymore, right? It's a good one, yeah. And I kind of just kept saying that in my head. And so that, when I get out there, that's all I need to be able to say. We even as a team, as a part of our TEDx, had some rituals that we started to implement. After people got off stage, backstage, all of the other speakers that day were lined up in the hallway, and we had what we called the hug brigade, and we celebrated and hugged the person who just got off stage. But that was really a day where I needed to find my big work energy. And there were some small but subtle rituals that helped me find it, right? A mind shift around what rehearsal meant, feeling my feet on the ground, that mantra of saying that first line. I went wearing casual clothes in the morning, changed into my TED outfit about a half hour before. Once I changed into that outfit, I didn't sit down again. I wanted to stand, right? So these are some of the subtle things we might do on a big day to find that big work energy. I found that during the pandemic, so I've been in consulting for a long time, and this is why I should have a script. Didn't plan on telling you this, but I've been in consulting for a long time, and then I decided I was going to make a change, and I went and got a job at a tech company out of Toronto, working remote from Winnipeg. I was like, I'm going to work in tech. This is going to be awesome. And then I started that job, and I was like, I hate this. Ew. And so then I started my own business, just I needed that experience to know what I actually wanted to do. But I did some interviews remotely. And I definitely had things I did before those interviews. Like, again, standing up, walking around before you sat down and got on that call. Like, sometimes like giving myself a high five in the mirror, a smile, whatever. But like just things to make me feel a bit more energetic, right? To make me feel like I haven't just been like sitting in the same sweatpants for 5 days in a row at my computer, right? So when you think about your big work energy, I think there's a few different things you can think about. One is, maybe I'll start with a question. How many people here are leaders? Does anybody here lead others? Yeah, at work or committees or whatever? Okay, lots of people. So you might think about some of the rituals that support you in being a leader and leading others. And something I talk a lot about in leadership training is the idea of making time to lead. Every leader I work with, I talk about intentionally setting time aside, building yourself a practice or a ritual around making time to lead. Kind of that idea of, you know how we tell entrepreneurs, like, don't just work in your business, work on your business. Like telling leaders, don't just work in your team, work on your team. Take time once a week, maybe it's 15 minutes, maybe it's 30, time that is just for you, where you sit down and you really think about what's working with the team, what's not working, who's doing great, who's struggling, what's my next move. Because we know that two things leaders, like really great leaders, do consistently is they reflect and they experiment. They're creative, right? They're creative, they experiment. And so if you lead others, I really encourage you to set some time aside and build yourself a bit of a ritual around leadership. What are the things that you want to think about when you make that time for yourself? Do you have a checklist of things that you think through? Am I giving enough recognition? Am I leading in alignment with my own values? Is the team got a lot of energy right now? How are we going to maintain that? Are they struggling? What's my next move there? Maybe you combine it with other things that you enjoy that help you make that time, right? Like maybe it's on a quiet Monday morning before anybody else gets into the office and you get yourself a coffee. Maybe you're driving into work and you grab something at Starbucks, or you stop at Bro Nuts on the way and you grab something and you sit and you take that time, right? Because everything that we need to do as leaders takes our time and intention. So we need to set some time aside to really think about how we're leading, how we want to lead. So that's a thought around rituals for leaders. For those that aren't leaders, or you can still use these if you are a leader, we might think about things like meditation, whether it's meditation in the morning as a part of a ritual, whether it's mini meditations during the day. Does anybody here follow Carrie Twigg? Lots of hands. I thought lots of people would probably follow her. She talks a lot about mindfulness and meditation, and she specifically talks about how it can be used in your day, right? Before or after a stressful meeting or a tough meeting, right? Like how can we take these mini moments of mindfulness to be at our best, in something that might otherwise be difficult. I'm a talker. I don't know if you can tell, I like to talk. And I've focused a lot as a young person on being like, Jane, you need to listen. Just sit back and this is the time for you to listen. It turns out if I tell myself to listen, it doesn't work very well. But if I just tell myself I gotta make notes, I listen. And so I have a practice now of making sure I always have a notebook with me. And if I feel like I'm talking too much, I go into note-taking mode, right? That helps me focus on listening better, slowing down, really thinking about when it's the right time for me to talk. Maybe you have practices around like jumping up and down before you go into a big presentation, a big meeting, an interview, right? Like getting some energy going, going for a walk at some point in your day, right? The gratitude piece was mentioned earlier. That's probably the most consistent ritual that I've been doing for the last year and a half. But I've done, 8 pieces of gratitude every single night for about a year and a half now. I've missed a couple nights due to like vacation stuff, but for the most part, I've been pretty consistent. What are those things that you can do that will help you at work and in life be at your best? Now, I'm just kind of curious as we're sitting here. I know you kind of thought about this a little bit earlier when you thought about rituals. But does anybody here, can you think of a ritual that you have in your day-to-day that helps you be at your best at work? Like something you do before that big meeting, that interview, that presentation, whatever it is. Can anybody think, or would you share for the benefit of the group, something that you do that helps you be at your best? Yeah. Mm.
And so I have a spot near my house when I run in the morning in nature. And I go every day, even minus 42. It's a little green. And I stand there and I think through those three questions. And when I travel or at the cottage, I also have a session like. So I feel like it just helps to ground me as
Yeah.
I go into my day. And I know, maybe if I didn't have a good night's sleep, like how I can be more aware as I move into my day and practices to bring my best self to others.
So those were 3 meditation questions, just in case not everybody heard. What am I proud of that I did yesterday? What could I do better? And what does my body need? Yeah. Okay. Anybody else have something you do? Yeah.
I don't know if Candace already told it, but for me, I'm very anxious. Like when I have to talk to some people, so I try to apply a breathing technique. So, and count up to 10 while breathing, and try to tell myself, well, if I'm in this situation, I can do it. So I just have to trust myself.
Okay. So employing some breathing techniques. Love it. Thank you. Anybody else? Yeah.
I always prefer
Tapping. Awesome.
You ever have heard of EFT tapping? So there is the tapping solution that I've heard of that, and that just brings calmness and this kind of the breathing is really helpful.
Okay.
As well. So
Excellent.
for that.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Anybody else? One more? Anybody else want to share? Felt like there was maybe a little hand movement there.
Sorry, I was rushing.
And right here too.
If I'm going into a meeting or something where we have a lot of ground to cover, there's that pause, prepare, questions, notes, or maybe I have a running document for every week, blah, blah, blah. But if it's going to be like a challenging conversation or something that you can't necessarily control the details about, sometimes I just take a moment to go like, okay, this, like I'll phrase it like a question, like a question to the whatever, like, oh, this could, if the outcome of this conversation could be the best that it could be,
Yeah.
what would that look like, right? Or if everyone could be heard and listened to, and what would that look like?
Yeah.
Kind of try and come in with this with an intention or a curiosity that it's.
Yeah.
I don't know. Just approach it with curiosity.
Yeah.
Guess.
I love that. So something that's maybe going to be tough or you're not sure how you're going to handle it, it's like, okay, what would it look like for this to work? What would it look like for this to go well? What would need to happen? Okay. So thank you all for sharing that. It's just nice to hear a few thoughts from some other folks. I encourage you all following this session today to think a little bit about your own big work energy, and maybe you're chatting with people after this, networking still a little bit this morning. And if you are looking for a prompt to talk to somebody new about, maybe you could ask, what are some words that might describe your big work energy? Have you thought about that? So that's maybe a conversation you can start with people today. Think about those things that people compliment you for, or those things that people notice in you that you don't always see in yourself. That might give you some direction around what your big work energy is as well. And I think that we're all better for knowing our own big work energy and really leaning into it, but also that sort of frees us when we're really comfortable with our own, I think, to really allow other people to be in their big work energy, right? Like I know where I am and what I'm all about and how I present and how I connect and all of these things, and it's okay for somebody else to do it differently. That's their big work energy. It looks different, than maybe mine does. So think about your big work energy. Think about those rituals that might help ground you in that big work energy so you can find those words, those feelings when you really need them. And, ideally, we're sort of making sure we're leaning into our big work energy for good, not for evil, right? That Prickly Jane doesn't come out. And when we find Prickly Jane, how do we transition back into uplifting, forward, fun, positive Jane? And I think we all just really benefit from knowing ourselves and finding those rituals that help us be the most authentically us. So that's where I'm going to leave you this morning. I want to just say a quick thank you to Linda, who I worked with a little bit. We talked through this concept a little bit before doing this talk, and that was extremely helpful. And I want to thank Christine and Kelly and Tamara and Lindsay and all of the folks I've connected with to be a part of this morning's session. And I will hand it back over to Lindsay. Thanks, everybody.